Got it. Okay. I'm Dan, and I have a long history with Future Generations, all the way back to its beginning. And while you're part of a university that's accredited, my first job was working on the accreditation of Future Generations as a graduate school. And it was an experimental graduate school. And once we had that down, then we worked on accreditation of the university. And all the while, we were experimenting. We were trying to figure out how on earth do we work creatively, critically, rationally, empathetically with community leaders around the world. And that has always been our passion and our focus. So even though I've moved on and spend 90% of my adult life right now in Asia, I'm happy to meet and collaborate with several Future Generations grad students. Back in the day when I was Future Generations more full-time, we were a cohort. Every entering class entered as a cohort and did everything together for 2 years straight on. You began and you ended within a 2-year window. And we spent months and months together in the field, 4 weeks, 5 weeks, 6 weeks at a time in the field. And I know it's different now. So to the extent that we can through Zoom on 3 sessions, but also through the forums, which you can be very active in, that can be our best effort at creating a cohort amongst each other. It will help a great deal if you know each other well before you meet at the guest house on Makti Boy Street in Ho Chi Minh City. So we'll be learning about each other and forming a cohort, at least for this residential, and you'll be learning a very great deal about Vietnam. You've already had a chance to look at a number of slides and my reflections, and I've asked you to reflect and give your impressions through the Moodle site. We're going to do some more of that right now. Let's begin with introductions and keep it very brief, very, very brief. Tell us where you are. That's one thing. But secondly, and I want you to answer this question specifically, tell us why you have decided to join this residential in Vietnam. So who are you, where are you, and why have you decided to join this residential in Vietnam? And let's do this as quickly as we can. Grace, I'm going to call on you first. Grace, you're muted. Can you introduce yourself, tell us who you are, where you are, and why you've decided to join this residential? Okay, I can't hear you, Grace, and I don't know why not. So I'm going to switch it over to Gori while you figure out how we can hear you better. So Gori, introduce yourself, please.
Hello, everyone. My name is Gauri Malakar. I'm from Nepal, especially from Kathmandu. I belongs to the Newar community, which is known as ethnic community of Nepal. But I spend my most of the time in the national park areas like Chitwan and Bardia National Park, where I learn about the conservation community and the tourism, the hospitality field. So when I was there, I was more into my job, and then I was not having my degree in the proper way because I was the one of the bed owner of the family also. So later now I third like I got the opportunity to go to the Dorpo, which you can see in the background. That lake is Sefoksundo Lake, which you just spoke about. So I was there, and then I saw the our community, which is very much lacking behind from the development, education, health and security, so many things. So it is in 2019 when I was there. So when I came back, the corona things happened, and it hits me like if I want to do something for the community, I need to learn more, or I need to understand more on what's happening in the world. So I was looking for the courses what I can do it, and I've come up with this university, the course in the community development. So I thought like this is the right platform me to go for my study, and then if uh, I gather the knowledge, and then I can do something for my our community over here. So this is the my initial plan when I joined the Future Generation. So this is my first semester. I just gone through community introduction with the look, and when I learned about the sit scale, which I like a lot, on how we are doing. So when I saw this Vietnam, so I thought like, okay, this is the very good start for me, because I can see the place where the city skill is already implemented, and then I can see the other side of the part also, and then I can learn more what they have doing, how they are doing, and then I come across with the networking. I will have a networking team, as well as lots of interaction will be happen, so that I can bring all those on me, and then I can implement to our community. So that's the reason why I joined uh, residential trip.
Okay, thank you so much, Corey. Grace, have you figured out how to speak loudly on virtual?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, very well.
I was having some audio trouble. That's my phone, so that's me too. My name is Grace Williams. I'm in Kermit, West Virginia, working at Big Laurel Learning Center as my community. I've been here 7 years and do a lot of educational work and environmental work with young people, students, first grade up through college students. So I was excited to get to join this course and do a residential experience in Vietnam. I haven't gotten to do one. I started my master's in the midst of COVID-19, so this is my final course, and yeah, I'm really looking forward to learning more from their standpoint, the standpoint of the people we'll be, meeting with and each other, on education and on sustainability, seeing what connections we can have and how we can, adopt and adapt different practices and ideas.
Okay, thanks. So more wanting to hear their experience as educators. You don't have a long-standing interest in the people or the region or the country of Vietnam, or is it that too?
That too, yeah. I'm interested in all of it. Yeah.
Okay, great. John, can you go next?
Thank you so much, Dan. My name is John Mariak. I'm from South Sudan, but I'm a refugee in Kenya. So I'm working in refugee Kakuma refugee camp in Kakuma. I work with youth with UNHCR. I deal with the youth activities, whereby I monitor the youth, identify the gaps that are in the youth program, trying to look the way forward on the gap that have been identified. I also carried out the group focus group discussion with the youth in the community to understand the press issues that they are having and look the way forward on how we can address them. So basically, that is what I do currently with the work that I'm doing with the UNHCR. It is dealing with the youth activities, but I'm also a co-founder of Kakuma Refugee Youth App and Innovative for Development. That half is for, we provide youth with the digital literacy skills whereby we capacity build youth on digital literacy, and then we link them up with the online job opportunities that are available. Then also we provide business and entrepreneurship skills to the youth, whereby we also connect them with mentors after training, and we allow them to pitch the ideas that they have. Then we support them to implement the ideas that they have after the training. So we also have the mentorship skills in school, guidance counseling in school, out of school, and in school student. So basically that's what we are doing at the Kakuma Refugee Youth Hub and Innovative for Development. So I was so inspired to join Future Generation University because it is where I fit, because I'm a change maker. And when I saw the content, so it fit me to be a change maker in the community. And I have experienced it now in the first semester, because this is my first semester. So in introduction to change, so I have learned a lot from what you're supposed to do in the community on identify the gap, how you can come together with the community, chip in, and then address the issue in the community. So it is really a great milestone to me. And I know very well it will really help the communities that I'm working with from currently and also in the future. Indeed, what has really inspired me to the Vietnam residential learning. I'm coming from the war-torn country, and I'm a refugee, and Vietnam have been undergo for several war. And now I'm very eager to go and learn how they have been resilient, and also the sustainability part of the country, and also the experience during the war and also currently. Because maybe in future, when I go back to my country, I will be able to apply the same thing that I will go and learn from there. So, okay. And then secondly, it is interacting. Will be interacting with different cultures of Vietnamese, and also meeting with different students from around the world, which I will be learning a lot, and also to network with them. And we learn from each other on different experience, and also network and different opportunities as well. Thank you.
All right, thank you, John. Very thorough. Robert, I know you're at work and you've posted things in the chat, which is very helpful introduction. Briefly tell us why you feel passionate about doing a residential in Vietnam to complete your master's studies with Future Generations.
If you're in a place where you can talk, he's I know he's working now in a okay. Detention center or a prison.
Okay, well that's helpful.
So
Robert, I'm going to assume you're not able to talk, so I'm going to speak on your behalf. And he has put a response to my question there in the meeting chat. Robert's from Pittsburgh, but he's working in West Virginia. He's done a lot of work with AmeriCorps, and he has worked on issues concerning the opioid epidemic. This is his last class with Future Generations, so it'll be interesting. On this residential, we'll have people who have taken 2 courses, and we have people who are taking this residential as their last course. So you'll have an ability to learn from each other as much as you'll possibly learn from Vietnamese. And Robert adds that right at this moment, he's back in Pittsburgh. So finally, he says he hopes to learn from this course because projects such as bending bamboo, how can they be formed? How can they be sustained? And he wrote in his form, as well as here, how does it work in a socialist country? It's tricky. So we're going to spend a lot of time figuring out how seat scale works in a socialist country, how curriculum writing works in a socialist country. And then I really like Robert, your last comment there. Westerners take so much for granted. And how do we do development, and how do we learn from scratch how to do development again and again and again? How do we even learn how to relate to people from such a different context as our own again and again and again? There's so little that we can take for granted in this process. So I appreciate those questions very much. Okay, who else do we have here online at this point? We've heard from Gori, we've heard from Grace, we've heard from John and from Robert.
Yep, and I think that is all. That's all. The Grace is both the phone number and and
do people know you, Chris, or do you need to introduce yourself real briefly?
I think everyone knows me. I'm Chris Roper. I'm Director of Student Affairs. I am currently just outside of Richmond, Virginia, which is about 160 kilometers south of Washington, D.C. I have an academic background in things Chinese and Chinese foreign relations, and I started a PhD program, which I did not finish, looking at Chinese and Vietnamese border relations. So I've also had a long interest in Vietnam. I've been to Vietnam several times, not as many times as Dan. I can count on one hand the number of times I've been there. Dan can probably needs more people to hold up fingers to count the number of times that he's been there. But I have I love the country. Every time I've been there, I love the people. And I'm excited to go back and meet our alumni and see what they're doing, and sort of look at seed scale from their perspective, and the whole thing that everyone's been talking about, how you do this sort of work in a socialist country with a government who is not very receptive to the things you're doing, even if they say they are, and all of those aspects. I'm also really looking forward to the amazing Vietnamese cuisine. Again, love it. It's great.
Great. So Chris is doing this for the food. I think we all heard
as
that.
I do for a lot of things, mostly for the food. I'm a well-trained dog.
Okay, good. I'd like to now move into some of the substantive material. And we're going to start briefly on the importance of relationships and a little bit of my philosophy of development, which includes seed scale, but foremost, it's about relationships. And we're going to talk about that briefly. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the importance of writing as a mode for critical thinking. And we're going to be doing some writing this morning. I've already asked you to do some writing in the forum, and there was a purpose behind it, not just to see if you on the website and could click and respond to a forum. I know you can do that. But writing for critical thinking in multiple modes of communication is so very, very important. So we're going to do that some this morning. Then we're going to talk about the parable of the farmer and the plow and how parables work and why parables. And we're going to do some writing about the parable. And then finally, we're going to close out our 90 minutes today with a look at Southeast Asia and where Vietnam fits in the larger context of ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, where a new curriculum fits with Vietnam in the context of ASEAN, but also a bigger question, which Robert talked about in his forum and Chris just alluded to, where East Asia and Southeast Asia and Vietnam fit in relationship to the West. Okay, so that's a lot, and it's already 25 minutes into our time, so we've got a lot to do in the next 65 minutes. Strap in, because it's going to be quite a ride. Okay, I'm going to jump to a share screen. and put this there and that there. Someday I want to speak to the person who created Zoom and ask why it takes so many clicks of the button to get a full screen up. First, you're going to meet, not all, but some of the graduates from Ganta. Some of them have moved on from Ganta. They're no longer working in the city. They're in other parts of the Mekong Delta. But there were two cohorts, and this group, they studied as cohorts. 15 of them started, 11 of them completed their work. And early on, when we did the graduate school, even before Future Generations was a university, there were two other Vietnamese who, one of them went on to earn a PhD, and he lives in a different part of the country. And another person completed his master's, and he lives in Hanoi. But you're going to meet at least a half dozen of the Ganta 11, as we call them. And these are a couple of pictures from two of the graduations. One celebrated in Ganta in the south, that's on the left, and the other in Hanoi. One person that I hope we can meet at our first Sunday dinner, but this gentleman has just gone through a stroke and a month-long coma, and his wife, who is a very dear woman and a famous ophthalmologist in the Mekong Delta, she's very protective of Dr. Sun's health. But Sun is the reason why there is bending bamboo. It was his idea that we try this. He has a reputation that spans all parts of Vietnam. In the early 1990s, even in the late 1980s, before the Ministry of Interior and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Vietnam allowed any foreigners into Vietnam, there was one national television station. And on that national television station, Dr. Sun, who at that time was a young man, he had a weekly program. And it was a weekly program for farmers on how to do integrated farming systems, how to do sustainable development, how to raise cattle, how to grow rice, how to have fruit trees. All of it was part of his weekly television program. And this, mind you, is on one channel, the only channel that the entire country had to watch. And that's where there were televisions. And so a village might have a single television. We were introduced, my wife and I were introduced to Dr. Sun in 1990. And he personally took our resumes, our applications to work in Vietnam, to all of the appropriate ministries in Hanoi, one by one by one, basically the Politburo of the Socialist Republic, and had people sign off on our visas. So we had the first visas for North Americans to work in the south of Vietnam after the American War years. Sun, at that time, was vice rector of the only university in the south of Vietnam. Now there are many universities, private and public, and Sun personally has helped form 4 universities from scratch. At the time that we started Future Generations in the late 1990s, Dr. Sun started Nam Ganta University in Ganta. It now has 25,000 students. So Dr. Sun is a national hero, and he is an entrepreneur, and he is a brilliant scientist, but he's also not very healthy. So we may not meet him, but it is because of Sun and our relationship to Sun that Future Generations can even contemplate a residential in Ganta. There are other people younger than Sun, but just as dynamic. So Dr. Hill is a professor of linguistics in Ganta, and he was a student of my wife and of mine back in 1990. And he was just 1 year out of being an undergrad at that time. But in 1990, 91, 92, only 5,000 students in the entire Mekong Delta of 25 million people, 5,000 students out of 25 million, had a seat at the university, and Hip was one of them. And from there, he went on to become a teacher and then a professor. I show Hip's face also because I've known him for 34 years. And given the culture and the care in which we have to relate with Vietnamese on subjects that are sometimes sensitive, 34 years into a relationship of somebody that I love dearly and he loves us dearly, we're still hearing for the very first time stories that he wished he could have told us 34 years ago or 20 years ago or 10 years ago. But things are opening up now. He can tell us stories now that were just not permissible before. And then besides our educators, there are other people that we'll meet along the way. So here is a gentleman, his name is Mui Gung. Mui Gung is a farmer, engineer, inventor, roaster, entrepreneur. He is somebody that was forced into being a member of the South Vietnamese military during the American War. Because of that, he learned a little bit about engineering. He did repair work on trucks. But because he had served in the South Vietnamese military in 1975 with the change of government, he was put into re-education camp. And so there were years of his adult life where, you know, there was very little that he could do. But when he got out of re-education camp, he applied his engineering know-how to create two things. One from scratch was a cacao garden of taken from seeds from Malaysia. And the second was he started taking discarded pieces of metal and creating roasters and all the equipment that he needed to create chocolate. He would not have been able to do any of that without the political cover of Dr. Sun, who gave political cover to farmers and to cacao orchard growers and to fishing people who were trying to be entrepreneurs. So my relationship and my knowledge about development is so dependent upon people like Mui Gung or Dr. Hip or Dr. Sun or the Gunta 11, as we call our group. And I just can't emphasize enough that we wouldn't be anywhere without the relationships. So my 3 R's are regard. I have regard, deep regard, respect for the people that make relationships possible. My second R is reciprocity. To keep a development project and a relationship going across more than 3 decades now is based on reciprocity. We are doing things for each other. If it's all in one direction, it's not sustainable. People lose their energy, they lose their sense of empowerment. And the third R is resilience. If it were just Dr. Sun and not the thousands of people that he's been a mentor for, his work would have no resilience. And the same with the work of our educators. While there are 11 who have taken the future generations and completed the master's degree, and before them, unrelated to Bending Bamboo, there were 2 others. This group has passed on its knowledge to scores and scores, hundreds of other teachers. And all of those teachers have about 200 students each. So resilience is depth and breadth, and more depth and more breadth. And that is a major component of this development work too. So that's the first part of what I wished for us to cover today. The second is the importance of writing. In communicative skills, we listen, we speak, we read, but the basis of critical thinking is done through writing. When you take a pen and you place that pen on paper and you force yourself, you train yourself, you empower yourself to write, you are doing critical thinking at that moment. So here are the different modes of writing that we're going to be doing. One, we'll do some private free writing in the course of this residential and during our time on Zoom. And a private free write is private. It's not to be shared with anyone. You don't even tell your spouse or your loved one about what you do in your private free writing. The second is what I call a focused free write, where I'll give you a prompt. And with that prompt, again, you'll put the pen to the paper and you'll write for whatever length of time I ask you to write. And you only lift your pen off the paper when I say stop, okay? So that's a focused free write. And at the end of a focused free write, I'll ask you to look at what you just wrote and then take your pen and underline, bracket something good that you wrote. And that is what you'll share. So when I ask you to share from a focused free write, all you do is read exactly what you bracketed and underscored. Nothing else. No comment. Nothing added. Nothing. And if you begin to add something, I'm going to cut you off because that's speaking. That's extemporaneous. That is not writing, and that's not critical thinking. Third kind of writing that I'll ask you to do is to begin journaling. And journaling can be private or you can share it with people. And I'll ask you to be journaling every day that we're in Vietnam. The fourth kind of writing is taking notes. How do you take notes? If I introduce you to Dr. Guang, who has the Mekong Environmental Workshop, I don't want you to just listen. I want you to have a structured way in which you're listening for the questions and the answers to those questions that Dr. Guang is wrestling with. I want you to take notes on his context and the concepts that he's introducing to you. And I want you to take notes on how he supports precisely the argument that he's presenting. He's a brilliant young man, brilliant. And I want you to capture as much as possible from Dr. Guang. And then the last kind of writing will be for those who are taking this course for 3 credits, and we'll be doing a lab. So you'll be doing a work plan. That's a fifth and final form of writing. Okay, so are you ready? If you have a pen, that's preferred mode of writing with paper. So I always have a pad of paper and I always have a pen. If you don't, you can use your fingers on the laptop, but actually your brain works better with pen on paper. So we're going to do a private free write for 5 minutes. There'll be no speaking. There'll be no distractions. What you're going to write is entirely up to you. I'm not giving you a topic. And all I ask you to do is to make sure that you start and do not stop writing for 5 minutes. Write for all 5 minutes. Do not allow yourself to stop. So if you're thinking, I don't know what to write, what you write on your paper is, I don't know what to write. I don't know what to write. Seriously, I don't know what to write. But something will come into your mind and you will then put that down on the paper. And that begins the process of your critical thinking. So if you have paper and pen, I want you at this point to get ready. And if you don't, put your fingers on your laptop with an open Word doc screen. And we're going to do a private free write for 5 minutes. Ready? Any questions? Begin. One more minute. And stop. Okay, you can lift your pen off the paper. As you can see, I do as I preach. So when I ask you to write, I'm doing the same thing. I have to keep thinking as well. That's a private pre-write. So I'm not going to ask you to bracket or share anything at all of what you just wrote. You may keep that for yourself, or you can crumple it up at the end of this period and put it in the waste bin. All right, let's turn to the parable. Yes, Chris?
Dan, can I just add something? I don't know if this was your intention, but I'm thinking for those whose native writing language is not in English, do you encourage them to write it in their own language? And
Totally.
then when we ask them to bracket or share something, they may have to translate at that point, I guess, or they can just say it in Nepali or whatever, we won't necessarily understand it. No, I think we maybe want it translated, but
So if we do a private pre-write, you may write that in any language you wish. You can draw a picture. If you do a focused pre-write where I give you a prompt, we'll do that in English, and you'll bracket what you write in English. I do this with my students from all over the world, and for some of them, English is their third, fourth, or fifth language, and they do their focused free writing in English. In all of their contexts, English is part of the global lingua franca of where they live. So even if it's their third, fourth, or fifth language, they do their focused free writing in English. So we'll come back to a focused free write in a little bit. But now I'd like to turn to the parable that I asked you to read and think about. First of all, what is a parable? Can anybody tell me their... So Robert is putting into the chat that you don't mind sharing your private thoughts. That's fine. But when we do a private free write, those 5 minutes is strictly private time. It's space. It's quiet. There will be a chance shortly for bracketing and sharing from a different kind of writing. Okay, so my question now is, what is a parable? And how does a parable work? I gave you the parable of the farmer and the plow. But what is a parable? Corey, Grace, John, Robert, go ahead.
A story that teaches a lesson?
It's something that teaches a lesson. Or Robert writes, it's a short story that conveys wisdom. Okay, so Grace, if it's teaching a lesson, maybe it's a fable. Maybe it's an allegory. If it's imparting a piece of wisdom, Robert, the question is, how do you get to the wisdom? So it's not a direct short story, but it's something that anybody can hear or read, and it's simple enough, it's common enough, that you can relate to it. So a parable is relatable, but the wisdom that's there is something that you come to only by stepping into the parable. So I asked you to read and think about and even share in the forum before class today something about the parable. And there are a couple of responses to it. Now we're going to read that parable together, and I want you to step into it. I want you to imagine that you're the farmer. So you're not just describing what happened in the parable, you are thinking as the farmer. But a parable has many characters. So in this particular parable, there are 4 different characters. So to really understand the wisdom, Robert, you have to also imagine that you're the other characters in the parable, and how do you respond? So let me put the parable up. And Grace, since I know your audio is working perfectly now, I'm going to ask you to read out loud for us all the parable. And as she does, I want everybody to imagine that you are in the parable. So go ahead, Grace. Would you read that for us?
There once was a very poor farmer who toiled his whole life working in the field. One day he came across a fine piece of wood and decided to make a better plow so that his work on the farm would be more productive. However, he had little experience in carving plows, so he took his piece of wood to the roadside and he sat down. He intended to begin carving his plow and to ask strangers passing by for their advice. A man came over and said, "That is no way to make a plow. It's too big. You should make it smaller." The farmer thought that was reasonable, and so he followed the stranger's advice. After a little while, another man came over and said, "You can't make it that way. The head of your plow is too big." The farmer found this advice more reasonable, so he corrected his carving and followed the advice of the second passerby. After some more time, he greeted a third stranger, who said at once, "The plow should not be that way. You made it too long. It is inconvenient to use." The farmer, once again, modified accordingly. By the end of the day, the farmer had only a small piece of wood and a stack of sticks. He could no longer make a new and better plow. He was very sad. But he had this thought: whatever I do, it is important to make a decision and act on it.
Right. Thank you very much. What I would like you to do now is a focused free write. And for 3 minutes, I want you to put your pen to the paper. So pull up that pen again, put it to your notepad, and I want you to write from the perspective of the farmer. From the perspective of the farmer. I want you to write, what should I do? What should I do? Okay, so 3 minutes, beginning now. You're the farmer. What should I do? Begin. One more minute. Bring your last sentence, your last thought to a conclusion. Put a period at the end of that sentence. And then look at what you've written. And I want you to bracket, underscore, bracket something good that you wrote that you would like to share with everyone. Okay, Gori, I'm going to start with you. Share what you wrote and do not add anything beyond what you wrote. And if you begin to just start talking, I will very politely cut you off. So only read what you bracketed from your writing. Go ahead. Thank you.
So that means I just read entirely what I read.
Only what you bracketed, but it has to be what you wrote.
Okay. As a farmer, first of all, I should decide what I need a blog, and if I need a blog, I must study what and how many types of blogs are available. I look for the carpenter who can make a blog for me. I visit and ask the details of how much of wood I need and what kind of wood I need. Do he able to make one for me and teach me also?
Okay, thank you very much. And Grace, read only something that you bracketed. No extra commentary, no editing.
Maybe I can find another large piece of wood. I'll do some research and talk to more trusted sources before beginning to carve. Or better yet, maybe someone will just lend me their plow.
Okay, thank you. John, can you read and only read what you wrote? Something that you bracketed from what you wrote.
Yes, as a farmer, through the advice that I have received, but it did not meet what I want, I will not blame myself, but I will start over again and try in different way to improve my plow.
Okay, thank you. And Robert, I'm not sure, can you speak? Or if you can't speak, put into the chat something that you wrote. Only something that you wrote. If you can't speak, show us your face and speak. Okay, I'm not sure that he can at this time. All right. Now I'm going to ask you to do a second focused free write. This time, you're one of the passers-by. The first or the second or the third person passing by. Okay, here's Robert. He wrote, I will learn to better rely on my own intuition as opposed to heavily reliant on the opinion of others. Okay, thank you. Yes, Rachel, your hand is up. Go ahead, please.
Good morning, everyone. Sorry for joining late. I've been in class with Daniel Taylor Masterclass in Victoria Falls. So I've just joined. I got in when you were assigning us to write something, and allow me to just read what I also wrote. I wrote that I'll assess my needs, then I'll seek knowledge on those who are experts on what I need. I will also not just take in information as it is, but I'll avoid wasting resources. Thank you.
Okay, and thank you very much, Rachel, and thank you for catching on while the rest of us are already prodding our way. So I appreciate that. We're going to do a second focused rewrite now. 3 minutes. This time, you're writing from the perspective of one of the passers-by. Okay. Rachel, can you mute?
Okay.
Mute your background. Thank you. 3 minutes. Begin.
Sorry, Dan. I have a question. We can think of any one of stranger, right? Any visitors.
Any one of the
Not-
three strangers. Anyone.
Okay, thanks.
Yes, hello.
Yes,
I
John.
did not capture. Network was breaking. I don't know. I did not get well.
So, John, this time you are writing from the perspective of one of the strangers. 3 minutes. One more minute. Draw your last thought to a conclusion, put a period at the end of that sentence, and then bracket something that you would like to share. And stop. Okay, John, let's begin with you. Read something that you wrote, but only what you wrote. Go ahead. Go ahead, John.
What I wrote is, hello, my name is John. I'm from South Sudan, but residing in Kenya. Kindly, can I know you, your name and what you are doing, where you are from? So it is my great pleasure to meet you. Yes, that is what I have wrote.
Okay, Grace, read from what you wrote about the parable.
I think my advice really helped him as he seemed like he didn't know what to do. I know from my own experience what I would like my plow to be like. I'm sure he will like it to be small and manageable just like me.
Thank you very much. Gori, what did you write?
Why do you need a new plow? You can buy one from the market. You are making larger than you need. So you do cut off and make it handy so it is easy to use.
Great, thank you. Robert, type into the chat something that you wrote, and while you're doing that, let me call on Rachel. Rachel, what did you write?
What are you making, say? Oh, I'm sorry, I really don't know how to do it, but I can refer you to an expert I know. I am sure he will help you with the correct measurements or give you an alternative, or rather train you on making your own. Thank you.
Okay, excellent. Call on the expat, indeed. And Robert writes, why is this guy asking me about making a plow? Doesn't he have any friends? Okay, now, process writing compares what you wrote the first time and what you wrote the second time. How differently did you hear and experience the parable as the farmer or as the passerby, the stranger? They're two different things, aren't they? And process writing is sort of meta thinking, metacognition. Why is it we look at the exact same story so differently depending on the perspective that we start with? Why is that? So where does this parable come from? At three different times in the course of working with the Ganta teachers, in completely unrelated situations. So it wasn't an assignment, but Miss Ju told me this parable. And several months later, Mr. An told me the same parable. And sometime later, Miss Tang, in a completely different circumstance, told me the same parable. So I step back from that and I think, wow, why do these three Vietnamese educators wish to share this particular parable again and again and again? So with that in mind, let's go back to the last part of what we'll cover today. And I want to do just 5 more slides of a PowerPoint. And I want to put Bending Bamboo, Future Generations, Seed Scale, and our Gunta 11 into the context of Southeast Asia. So we've got 23 minutes left, and we're going to take a quick, deep dive into Southeast Asia. Here it goes. So this is Southeast Asia. It's 11 countries. And John, you'll be interested to know that while South Sudan is the newest state on planet Earth, East Timor, or also called Timor-Leste, is the second most recent state on Earth. And while we're not going to be going to Timor-Leste, which is way down here at the bottom of the map, there are things that you'll learn about Southeast Asia and brand new states, post-colonial states like Timor-Leste, that I think are very pertinent to South Sudan. So for instance, Timor-Leste became a state in 2001. It has had 4 peaceful transfers of power through democratic elections in the time that it has been a brand new state. And I know South Sudan and Sudan have much more difficulty in regard to peaceful transfer of power. So one can begin to look at a new region of the world like Southeast Asia, which has 11 countries, and see very important parallels or contradictions to what you understand about life in your country. And so one question that I have for you, and we won't go into great detail for reasons of time right now, but of these 11 countries, how much do you know about how vastly different their forms of government are? How different are their histories, their religions, their belief systems, their institutions? While there are 11 states here, nation state, there are hundreds and hundreds of ethnicities and different groups of people. But a question to ask is, well, why is that? And who is it who names different ethnicities? So here's a quick summary of Southeast Asia. ASEAN, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, which right now has only 10 countries, but Timor-Leste will become a member of ASEAN, so it will be 11. The origin of ASEAN is SEATO, S-E-A-T-O, the Southeast Asian Treaty Organization, which was formed not by any of those countries that you just saw on the map. It was formed by the United States as a means of fighting communism after China and Mao Zedong and the success of the Communist Revolution in China. The United States formed SEATO and FPDA, the five-party defense agreement of Southeast Asia, that was put together by the British in 1971. Also, its purpose was to fight communism. And the non-aligned movement, NAM, was formed in 1961 by some of the countries of Southeast Asia in order to keep its distance from all the big parties in the Cold War. So building off of SEATO and FPDA, the United States, Thailand, and the Philippines, and then the UK, Singapore, Malaysia, New Zealand, Australia, then Indonesia, Burma, Cambodia, they formed ASEAN. And ASEAN has what they call the ASEAN Way, which is non-interference in the politics of any of the other countries of ASEAN. So it formed as a group of Indonesia, Singapore, Malaysia, Thailand, the Philippines as an anti-communist club in 1967. And then over time, it added Brunei. What do you know about Brunei? It's one of the wealthiest per capita places on earth. It's dripping in oil money. So in 1984, it became independent and it joined ASEAN. Vietnam, clearly a communist state, joined ASEAN in 1995, but only after the US lifted its international embargo against Vietnam. And then Myanmar and Laos were invited to join ASEAN in 97, Cambodia in 1999, and soon, probably this year, Timor-Leste will also join. So it began with external pressure and funding from the US and Britain. Then it became something more indigenous, and it moved from being an anti-communist club to something which is, at this point in time, very, very different. So on the right side of this PowerPoint slide, you see some of the reasons that ASEAN exists today. It's rewriting its history from an Asian perspective. It's tired. It is fed up. It has had enough of reading histories written about Asia by the West. So it acknowledges that stories about the dawn of civilization are more Asian than Western, and that there are ancient Asian empires. And what you read about in the article I gave you in the book by Rush, There are mandalas, spheres of influence, which were formal and informal, but they radiated across Southeast Asia. All of that was pretty well structured and sustainable before the 1500s, before the 16th century, when European colonization and imperialism arrived. So interestingly, Asia had empires. Asia had sustainable trade routes. Asia had, in some cases, really well-established trade routes before the European colonizers came. That changed everything. Part of the reason colonization was able to take hold is because, one, they had a different kind of form of aggression. They had a military might that Asia had not seen before. So the gunships, the cannons, the oppression was one thing. The second thing that the Europeans brought was a different reason for trade. So imperialism is not just colonization. Imperialism is movement of goods from one part of the world to another part of the world to make subaltern states, subservient states, part of a European economy, or to take from that subservient state, that subaltern state, material for the industrial production of goods in Europe. All right, the next part of this rewriting of history from an Asian perspective, which is an ongoing project of ASEAN, is to acknowledge we're no longer in the Cold War. Those 11 countries no longer have to figure out exactly where they fit in the Cold War between the Soviets and the Americans, between the Chinese, the Russians, and the Americans. They don't have to be caught up in the middle of what's happening in the Middle East or what's happening between Ukraine and Russia. They can form multilateral agreements and projects, diplomacy, security, trade, labor, adjudication. They can do all of that independently as a regional body of 11 Southeast Asian countries. That's a big shift. That's a huge shift in thinking. No longer a footnote to Western history, but rather a history of its own, and one that can be shared and should be shared and must be shared with the rest of the world. There are big challenges. Look at the bottom right-hand side of this screen. There are huge challenges that those 11 countries face. All but one of those countries is on the waterfront, and with rising sea levels, climate change, pollution, there are going to be huge changes. There already are huge changes. So there has to be collaborative research on sustainability, on security, on problem solving. So that's the ASEAN of today. So here is a pre-modern picture of Southeast Asia, and the darker parts that are colored in here, these are long-standing ancient kingdoms and small civilizations. So for instance, Vietnam was at one time part of the Funan civilization, which no longer exists. There's hardly even any archaeological evidence of that civilization. There's just a little bit, but archaeologists are trying to get to the heart of that matter right now. Champa, which is the middle part of Vietnam, this was part of Angkor Wat. And so Angkor Wat is right here, and it spilled over and went all the way to this body of water. So Vietnam is affected by this long-standing culture and civilization, and the Funan. More distant, but also influencing Vietnam, is the civilization that came out of present-day Thailand and Myanmar. So this also is a map from the reading I gave you from Rush. And this is Rush's term, mandalas. Mandalas meaning spheres of influence. So it wasn't 11 states, because at this point in history, there weren't any states. That's a European idea. It comes out of Europe trying to come up with a solution to its ongoing warfare in Europe. And in the 17th century, they create the concept of states. So before the rest of the world became full of states, which happens in 1945, what you had in Southeast Asia were these mandalas, these spheres of influence between different cultures and civilizations that were exclusively Southeast Asian. So there is from the West some influence from India. There is from the North some influence from China. But what you see here are pre-existing cultures, civilizations, trade arrangements of expanding and contracting mandalas. They had their own political institutions. They had their own trade civilizations. They expanded, they contracted, they ebbed, and they flowed as nature and climate changed the land. So Vietnam is at the end of the Mekong Delta, but the MKD, the Mekong Delta, has changed remarkably over time. The silt that comes all the way downriver, starting in Tibet and coursing through China and Laos and Cambodia and Thailand, ends up in Vietnam. But that amount of mud that accumulates in the alluvial delta of Vietnam has increased and decreased, increased and decreased. And with that, populations of people move. So the Mekong Delta and its population has shifted over time with nature. But among these groups, they specialized in certain products. So Indonesia, for instance, had tremendous spices that they traded among other countries here of Southeast Asia. It changes in the 16th, 17th, 18th, and 19th century when the Portuguese, Dutch, French, Spanish, British, Germans, and Americans arrive. And that's the colonial period. So what did the French do to the pre-existing institutions and political system and trade of Vietnam? What did the Dutch do to the pre-existing pre-colonial situation in Indonesia? What did the British do? What did the Portuguese do? These are really key questions. And what ASEAN and what Vietnamese are interested in doing is knowing that history and writing that history from their perspective, not just learning it from history books written by the West. So let me jump out and ask, what questions or comments or response do you have to that very, very fast introduction to a history of Southeast Asia? Robert, I know you can't speak, so maybe you can type something into the chat. Of those that are in this Zoom session, John, Gory, Rachel, the three of you are from contexts that were also colonized by the West. So it's not unlike the ongoing project in ASEAN or Vietnam or Southeast Asia to identify and write your own history without the beginning and the ending point being the West. So do you have any response? Or Grace and Robert, you, like Chris and I, come from the West. And whether we're from Colorado or West Virginia, we've been the colonizer. We've been the imperialist. So how do you think of this history that's being re-examined and a future that's being rewritten? And now think about the parable. Who's the farmer? And who's the stranger with all kinds of knowledge on how to make a plow? And Robert's question, doesn't this guy have any friends? Can't he just go to TikTok or YouTube and figure out how the heck to make a good plow?
Is Vietnam the farmer and the West is the advice to follow new ways?
Maybe, but don't turn a parable into an allegory. Okay, it's tricky. You don't want to reduce the wisdom. Robert's right, a parable has wisdom, but don't reduce the wisdom to an allegory. Okay, in some ways, in Southeast Asia, you can plug anybody into that farmer role or into that expert, stranger, passerby role. And the same is true of West Virginia. The same is true of Colorado. So, 5 minutes left. One more thing is to ask, why did Dr. Sun, if we go back to those slides that you had at the very beginning, those relationships that I asked you to look at and think about before we even started our first session. Why did Dr. Sun want something like bending bamboo? It was his idea. It's not a future generation's idea. But he invited some educators, and this was in 1989. 1989. So in 1989, there was a full international US-led embargo on Vietnam. Vietnam could not trade with Taiwan. It could not trade with the Philippines. It could not trade with Malaysia. It could not trade with Thailand. If Vietnam traded with any of those countries, the United States put pressure on that country and punished them through lots of means. So in 1989, Vietnam was extremely poor. There were only 3 organizations that Vietnam decided from the level of the Politburo, which is the very, very top of the Socialist Republic. The Politburo is the top of the Central Committee. The Central Committee is the top of the cells that are across the whole country. So at the Politburo level, a dozen men, they picked 3 groups that Vietnam could relate to in the West. The Quakers, because the Quakers had been pacifists and had helped Vietnam through the French and the American wars. And after the wars ended, the Quakers stayed and helped refugees. But they weren't allowed to live in Vietnam. They lived outside of Vietnam and helped. Second, they chose the Mennonites, because since 1954, with the French and then the Americans, they had helped with rebuilding in the waste of war. And while they could not live in Vietnam, they lived next door, and they started the long process of clearing out landmines. And third, they welcomed Stanford University in California, because all the way back to 1954, Dwight Clark, the undergraduate dean, had introduced programs about reconciliation with Vietnam. So from those three groups, Vietnam started a process of trying to relate to strangers, passers-by, people from the outside, on how to get beyond the embargo, how to rebuild. So fast forward to Dr. Sun, 1989, Bending Bamboo. He wanted teachers to come together, Vietnamese teachers to come together, to write a new curriculum, to write a new history, and to figure out how can we get the government in Hanoi. So these are people in the South. How do we get the people with all the power in Hanoi to agree with our idea to write a new curriculum? All right. And we're going to have to stop there because our 90 minutes are up, but we'll pick up on that note in 2 weeks. And Rachel, I hope in 2 weeks you can join us for the full 90 minutes. I hope, Chris, if this conflicts with a course that Daniel's teaching, then we need a different time. And we need also to...
It's just today. Daniel happened to schedule these after we scheduled ours. He's in Zimbabwe, so it's just today.
Just today. All right. Okay, and we'll figure out where the rest of the crew is, because these preparatory times help us build a cohort that we don't yet have. And we will need the strength and the encouragement of the love, the patience, the grace of a cohort to get through this. Okay, any questions before we part? All of your questions and reading material are there on the Moodle. Please, please, please read all of that ahead of time and participate fully in the forum. It's one of the important forms of writing. Okay? Chris?
Yep, that sounds good. I'm going to stop recording. Dan, can we talk a little bit later? I've got a meeting that's starting a minute ago. But if you want to talk later about assigning partners, maybe we can do that.
Okay, send me a time by email and
We'll do.
I'll carve it out of my day. Bye-bye, folks. Take care. Be well.
Bye.
Goodbye. Thank you all.
Bye.
Bye.